Hello and welcome to Gin with Gwynne. I'm Oliver Gwynne. This is where I give my off-the-cuff and unrehearsed thoughts on marketing, data, and philosophy. This week I'm talking about the capacity flip. Every business sits at a demand capacity curve. At one end, more customers than you can serve. At the other, more capacity than you can fill. The flip is the moment that you cross from one to the other, or more likely a slow drift towards that you don't notice. A dangerous assumption here is that too much demand is often a nice problem to have. It isn't. Both extremes can destroy value just in different ways. And let's be honest, most businesses aren't at either extreme. They're somewhere in the middle, drifting between one and the other. So let's start with the nice problem to have, supposedly, when demand exceeds capacity. So the instinct that most businesses will have when you can't serve everyone is to monetize the queue. And that's the correct assumption to have. The mistake is doing that in ways that reshape who you are. So I have a really good example for this. Disney parks. Revenue per guest rose from $54 in 2015 to $112 by 22, according to their quarterly filings. And they achieved this by taking out a load of stuff that used to be free, fast passes, and then replacing it with Genie Plus, Lightning Lanes, all of these systems that then cost money, and essentially realizing that, hey, if we're going to have high level of capacity that we know is going to be filled, we need to get more money out of each individual guest. And you might think, well, that's a good result, $54 to 112. Good job, Disney. But there was a downside to this. A 2023 YouGov survey showed that Disney's net positive brand perception among US adults dropped from 54% in 2019 to 43% in 23%. But among families with children, their core demographic, the decline was sharper. Annual pass holder cancellations were also significant enough that Disney stopped reporting pass holders as a separate metrics in their earning calls after 2021. That used to be a talking point, but they became a liability. Bob Iger, who is the former now CEO who returned, said, we may have put too much emphasis on pricing. And if a CEO is telling you that the extraction model broke something, then you know it may have gone wrong. And he did restore Lightning Lane, a free version of that modified in some form in 2024. So the trap is that when you charge for access, you select people who value efficiency over experience. That's a different customer to the one who built your brand necessarily. Serve them long enough that you have quietly rebranded. Now, Disney is something obviously close to my heart, and I talk about quite often in these blogs, but I think the other danger for them was just long-term thinking. So this was a short-term problem that we've seen here, but in the longer term, and this is true of any premium brands, I think we could call Disney a premium brand, is you need a route to premium. You need people to experience premium in a lower price point so that they can get used to the idea and then they can go from that. People do not go from like McDonald's to Michelin star restaurants like that, do they? They have to go fast food restaurants as teenagers. They go to ZZ's pizzas, chain restaurants, all this kind of thing, higher price point, and then eventually they go to nice restaurants, maybe even Michelin restaurants when they get to the higher earning point. But they need a route to premium. You don't go from one to the other, and this is why it's very sensible for a lot of premium brands, in my opinion, to have something that is lower priced to get people used to it. And you could argue with Disney that like Disney Plus is that kind of brand where you're getting them to know you and your values and all that kind of stuff. And ultimately, you're going to upsell them a theme park ticket. But my point is that you have to have a route to access. And if people have never experienced a Disney park before, then it's extremely unlikely that they're going to be tempted by that. You know, it's much less likely. Once you've been on one holiday with Disney, you're much more likely to book a second and third and fourth. The average for most people is 4 times over their lifetime. And there's a lot of people who are much more than that. And so I think the real trap there is if you set prices too high that people can never experience this thing, it's just something that they're never going to be able to do. At a certain point, your rich customers might not be interested. You might completely ignore your core demographic that will build up to that. And so price elasticity is very important, and not forgetting the core demographic of who you're trying to, because there's only so many rich people in the world. What about the other side of the problem? What about when capacity exceeds demand, the fill the room trap? So here you have more supply than demand can absorb. The margin compresses, the instinct is to broaden appeal, and that instinct executed badly can destroy the thing that you've made worth coming to. So Peloton built out manufacturing capacity during peak pandemic demand. In Q2 2021, they reported a 1.6 billion in revenue. By Q2 2023, that was 792.7 million. That's a 25% decline. They wrote down 181 million in inventory in 2022, laid off 4,500 people in February of 2022 alone. It's about 20% of the workforce at the time. So the capacity they built for a world that didn't persist cost them roughly $665 million in total, restructuring and write-down charges across 2022, 2023. And the demographic failure, and this is very common along a lot of entertainment businesses, a lot of subscription businesses, mobile apps, all of these things that were very, very successful during the pandemic. I'm not saying that Peloton were crazy to do this. Like, lots of people were doing it. The demand was there. But the mistake was that they assumed that pandemic era buyers were early adopters of a lasting behavior changes, and a significant portion were situational buyers, bored at home, discretionary income. And when gyms reopened, churned, exposed the difference. By 2023, connected fitness subscriber net adds had gone negative. WeWork, another extreme version of that, it had 755 locations at its peak in 2019, 47 billion valuation for some reason, just an office. Guys, don't know why people were hyping up the owner. By 2023, they'd filed for Chapter 11. So the logic at grow locations didn't then expand. There's only so much demand for what is co-working, and WeWork was just a co-working space, no matter how much they wanted to tart it up as something different and a community and all that kind of vibes. At the end of the day, there's only so many businesses that are small enough that they would need WeWork type offices and not have their own offices, which is maybe where the real money is there, and they still want the flexibility and ecosystem of a WeWork. So the drift. Most capacity flip problems aren't dramatic. They're quite slow, and you don't notice you've drifted until the metrics are already pointing one way, the wrong way. So here's some rule of thumbs that you can sort of look out for. If your revenue is growing, but your NPS is flat or declining amongst your oldest customers, then you are in drift. If you're acquiring new customers, but eroding the people who built you, you are potentially in drift. And although sometimes that drift is planned for, that you want to move to a different kind of market, it can potentially be a dangerous moment for your company. I've seen a lot of people who try and serve a higher lifetime value customer, and they see this drift, and then they experience more price sensitivity than they were experiencing. They experience less loyalty than they were expecting. People at higher price points are sometimes more difficult to serve, and it actually costs them money in the end. Some other signals are if your conversion rate is holding, but your inquiry volume is changing composition. So if there's more price sensitive leads, more requests for discounts, more single purchase rather than repeat, then your positioning has shifted in the market, even if you haven't changed anything internally. There's that classic Harvard Business Review back in 2014 said it costs 5 to 25 times more to acquire new customers than to retain an existing one. So if you're filling capacity with the wrong customers, you are paying acquisition cost for churn, essentially. So some metrics to check. Waiting or wait list conversion rate. So not just the length of a wait list, but if you have 500 people on a list and you're converting 30%, that's real demand. If you're converting 8%, then the list is social proof, not pipeline. This is for typically if you're launching new products that you might think about that. Time to first purchase, good one. So you want to measure that by acquisition channel, not overall as a one figure. So a shortening time means the pull is increasing. A lengthening means that there's some friction or hesitation. A divergence between channel means one of them is sending you the wrong people typically, or perhaps there is some sort of built-in mechanism that you're trying to avoid where you are on social media, they click on a link, that link sends them to a certain place, they then have to go to another one to book, all this kind of stuff that you might have seen a million times before. Inquiry to sale ratio by segment. So your overall close rate is almost meaningless. You want to look at close rate of like LinkedIn versus referral versus cold outbound. If referrals close at 40% and cold closes at 6%, those are two business differences that are really worth noting. And that's often the case, right? People who are referred are always going to convert higher than people who are completely cold. And so you have to think about the time and value of money that you would put into people, because, sometimes referrals don't happen by design, whereas cold can be designed to a higher degree. Lead quality score over time, so a pretty basic one, but if your average deal size from new inquiries is declining quarter on quarter, you're attracting lower value customers, and this would still be true B2C or B2B. You may be filling capacity, but you're doing it with worse terms, basically. A few indicators on like supply utilization. So capacity utilization by time band, again, not an overall metric that you want to be tracking. So if you're a restaurant and you have 85% average utilization, you can still be losing money if Friday to Saturday is 100% and then Monday to Thursday is 62%. The average hides sort of structural problems with that. So you need it day to day and hour to hour, to be honest, about when you're going to be busy, when you're going to make money, when you're not going to be making money. I'm sure most restaurants have that to a degree. Revenue per unit of capacity, so per seat, per hour, per license, per whatever your unit is. This number should be rising. If it's flat while volume is increasing, your price power is eroding. Gross margin by customer cohort. So do older customers generate better or worse margin than newer ones? If worse, your mix is shifting towards lower value business, and you should know that explicitly. Of course, there are some like demographic and brand signal indicators that are really, really difficult to sort of control, if I'm honest, but NPS is a good one, or reviews of some kind. So segment your NPS into by 6 months, 6 to 18 months, 18 plus months. Healthy business has an NPS rising with tenure, or at least staying the same if it's always been high. If long tenure customers are your lowest score, something has shifted in the way that you're offering, or if you're only doing NPS on a one-off basis, that's also not a good thing to be doing. Referral rate by customer type. So your best customers should always be referrals, as I was saying earlier. If they're not referring, either the product has changed, the experience has changed, or they're no longer proud to associate with you. All three of those can be problems. Demographic composition can change year on year, but that requires you to actually like collect and track data, which a lot of businesses don't. You should know whether your customer base is getting older, younger, wealthier, more price sensitive every year. If you don't, you'll only find out when the revenue tells you that, and that's really dangerous. And so what should you be tracking? How do you then be more proactive, apart from tracking all these things and seeing afterwards, oh my God, things have got worse? So you want to think about segment, and you want to think about next best action. I know next best action is like a pretty simple way of looking at these kind of models, but I kind of like it because it's a good description of what you actually want. So you kind of want 4 buckets. Let's keep this nice and simple. High value, high alignment, that's one bucket. So who, high spend, repeat purchase, refers others, matches the profile that you want more of. If you're a B2B business, like probably 15 to 25% of your customer, but like 50 to 70% of your revenue, that 20-80% split. And so next best action is to think about retention and replication. You want loyalty that means something to them, which would be exclusive access, early released, a real relationship basically, and mining that group for signals about why do they love you, what would make them leave, who do they think that you should be talking to, because what is valuable to them as your core demographic will probably be good selling points to other people. Next bucket, if we're just doing like 4 buckets, high value, low alignment. So who spends well, but they're not the future you're trying to build towards. Maybe they're an older demographic that you're trying to move away from. Maybe a use case that doesn't fit the roadmap. And so you want to serve them well, but you don't necessarily want to build for them in the future. Now, don't let their revenue distort your product decisions necessarily, unless they make up a very significant part of your budget, in which case, why are you moving away from them? Don't let them sway your marketing necessarily, but they need to be tracked separately, communicated to separately. You don't want them to think that you are necessarily moving away, because when they churn, you might not want to chase them if they're not the people that you want to serve in the future. So they need to be in their own bucket, and you need to think about them separately. Next people are low value, high alignment. So they fit your profile perfectly. They don't spend enough yet. This is the group that most people are interested in. So like the earlier in the relationship typically hasn't quite found the right product or perceives that the upgrade is not quite worth it. Typically like 20 to 35% of your customer. And your next best action with them is sort of targeted upgrade paths, usage-based prompts. You've used X this time. Where is the value for these people? Typically, you need some sort of education-led nurture for them. And the question is always, what's the specific friction stopping them from spending more? Is it price perception, awareness, habit, or trust? Each has a different intervention, and you need to figure out the data that will show you those 4 different things. And last but not least, low value, low alignment. So there's nothing wrong necessarily with these people. You might be thinking, well, let's just get rid of these people completely. But they're filling capacity today, but they're sending the wrong signal for tomorrow. They've acquired through imprecise marketing, often viral moments, desperation just to fill the room and get anybody in. That's fine. There's a use case for that. But you don't necessarily want to grow that segment. You want to manage the churn naturally. If you don't need it actively, then you want to reduce attracting those people before. You don't necessarily want people on your list that are only going to respond to like discounts every single time, unless you have capacity. And that's where the difference between people who only respond to a discount and people who respond to offers who can then act quickly are two valuable things to track. Like, they're going to respond quickly and they're going to respond cheaply. Okay, I'd go for the people who respond quickly first and then cheaply, and then a combination of the two. A couple of case studies for you here. So Ryanair has like the opposite playbook for most businesses, right? Ryanair is like a budget airline, in case you're not familiar, and they're not trying to extract premium from like constrained capacity. They don't have constrained capacity. They create demand by making price so low that a segment would otherwise not fly becomes a flyer. Basically, you're probably not going to fly, but it's so cheap that you think, okay, I'm going to fly. So their load factor, which is like a percentage of seats filled, runs consistently above 90%. They hit 96% in the summer of 2023. Their revenue per passenger is supplemented not by filling the seats, but by ancillary charges, so baggage, priority border, seat selection. In some cases, they can double the headline ticket. And in some cases, if everybody just went on the flight and didn't pay for any of those things, they'd actually lose money. So they're not trying to attract business travelers or premium leisure. It targets price primary customers and serves them with like brutal efficiency. And if you want something slightly better, you have to pay for it. They don't want customers who expect comfort, and everything is reflected around that. There's a clarity of their positioning, is why they don't face like brand drift problems. They never pretend to be anything else. They're not trying to be, oh, luxury on cheap. They're trying to be, hey, we're a cheap airline, don't expect anything, no frills. And they've been very successful because of that. So that's a really interesting case of like the opposite way around how this can work. Another one would be Premier Inn versus like boutique hotels. So Premier Inn is like a mid-market capacity hotel here. It's slightly better maybe than Travelodge in terms of branding. It's got the word Premier in there. And they run at capacity rates of like 78 to 82% range across the UK. It's a UK brand, according to their annual reports. Average room rate in 2023 was apparently or approximately £82. And it achieves this by being absolutely clear about what it is, functional, consistent, no surprises. Pricing is according to that. And independent boutiques in the same cities often run at like much lower than that, like 65 to 72% occupancy, but they charge like 150 to 250 pounds per night. In good years, the revenue per available room will actually be similar between these two brands. So in soft demand years, the boutique is exposed. So when demand goes down, tourism goes down, all those kind of things, it doesn't have the volume to absorb that 10-point occupancy drop. But Premier Inn does, because its cost structure and brand clarity means that it can cut the rate and shoulder those seasonal differences or, big economical differences without too much distress. And that's the difference between a boutique hotel, which tries to fill rooms by then discounting, and Premier Inn, who already has a set price and a set value and is more consistent on that. They're going to fill their rooms much more easily than a boutique hotel. So I covered quite a lot in this video in the end. When demand is high, the danger is optimizing for only the rich people, and you replace your best customers with the most profitable ones, and there is a difference. And then you discover that those people who are the most profitable ones aren't necessarily the people who are the most loyal to your brand, aren't necessarily the people who represent what the brand is going to be going forward. And they might only be there for a certain time in their life, depending what kind of business you are. You still need to necessarily build so that other people can become those loyal customers. And they might not be there when the demand is low. When demand is low, the danger is filling the room with whoever will come and then finding out that you've redefined your brand and your proposition in the process. The businesses that navigate both ends of these are the ones who know exactly who they are and who they were before the flip happened, and they maintain a level of consistency. And so I think the core with most of these things is we can't control the world around us. We can't control the pandemics. We can't control downturns. We can't control wars. We can only control, our messaging, our price point, how we want to be. And so consistency is really important in those things. It gives you a level of control that then you can make smaller ad hoc decisions at both ends of the spectrum to ensure that you are getting the most profit from customers, but also that you're attracting people who will be more valuable to you in the long run. And all of the things to say is if you're moving from one demographic to another, you always need to do that slowly over the case of years. It needs to be 3-4 years. You can't just go from 1 to 0 because you will definitely stop being profitable in the meantime. I've seen that a million times before. Thanks very much for watching another Gin with Gwynne. I hope you found this interesting. And put in the comments what you want me to talk about next week.